Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Crucible. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson. Tonight, we have Made by Jimbob going up against Nathan. He's from the channel Digital Gnosis. We'll have that link down in the description post-debate. Before we get into it, just make sure you like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff that bumps the algorithm up. That's really good for the channel. We can't survive if we don't have reach. So we appreciate you guys doing that. Make sure that you get that done. And we'll be right back with both of our debaters. And everybody always loves the warm-up song, right? It gets the blood pumping. It's not just a bunch of nerds on the internet talking about philosophy, right? It's great stuff. Nathan, take a second, shout yourself out, tell everybody where they can find you.
Sure. Thanks for having me on. My channel's Digital Gnosis. You can find me pretty much everywhere under, Digital Gnosis if you search it. I don't really update the Facebook, but on Twitter, that's my moniker, and the YouTube channel's name as well.
Slow Boy Whiteboard says, this music makes me want to be chased by police through the desert. Couldn't agree more. Made by Jimbob. Go ahead, shout yourself out, shout your channel out.
Made by Jimbob. You could find me pretty much everywhere with that name. Thanks, Nathan, for jumping on such an early part of the morning. And sorry, Andrew, that we're both very calm people, and we're not going to really follow that music very well.
You know, you couldn't just do a little bit of yelling and screaming for me, just a little bit. It's okay.
I like the music, though.
It is good music. It's good music. Anyway, Jimbob, as you were the challenger, we're going to let you open first.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes on the clock. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay, naturalism is the philosophy that everything arises from the natural world, and everything that can be accounted for is accounted for by natural processes. Some people go as far as saying that matter is all there is. Now, if naturalism is true, then all of reality is purely just a mechanism. That is to say, any statements about the machine we call reality are effects or outputs of a predetermined operation. From this view, there is no justification for knowledge or truth because mechanisms don't produce epistemology. In a pure mechanism, there's no difference between one proposition from a brain and another proposition from a brain. There would be no difference, in fact, from a proposition of a brain and some bubbles coming out of the ground at a natural hot springs. In other words, if opinion A, Jimbob, is just an output, and opinion B, Nathan, is just an output, then how does the selector, tonight the audience, opinion C, how do they determine the veracity of the opinions if they themselves are another output? See, there's no deliberation, there's no consideration in a predetermined reality. There's no determining things with the mind, with reason, and such. Not only does naturalism lack a foundation for epistemology, but it has another obvious problem, which is that it can't account for the necessary tools to even pursue knowledge. Laws of logic, meaning, information, mathematics. If these are just merely sensations or outputs from our brain, there's no reason to make any sense of them at all or assume that they're somehow steady Naturalism must reject that there's any free will or mind, which is another big problem. In the pursuit of truth, it must reject any independent appraisal of statements from which persuasion is even possible. So I'm not convinced of naturalism for a simple reason. If I was persuaded, I was predetermined to be from the start. If my opponent is correct about his position, then it's a performative contradiction for him to really be here arguing with the notion of swaying minds. After all, argumentation is not only predetermined, but both positions are mere effects of the natural machine. So when we figure out what's coherent, which is the question, is naturalism or physicalism, I'm sure Nathan has a more nuanced view of it, right? But if it's true and it's coherent, how could it be coherent if everything that we're coming to as a conclusion is already predetermined? Are we actually using our minds and listening to each other? Are we putting each other's propositions in some sort of format that's absolute that we can check each other on? Is there any real reason to acknowledge contradictions or consistency? I don't think so from a purely mechanistic view. So tonight the challenge, I believe, for Nathan would be to figure out how epistemology is even possible from a strict machine, and then the tension between the physical world and an independent thinking mind that's must necessarily transcend a strict robot process. So that's my opener.
Appreciate your opening statement, Jimbob. Nathan, go ahead. You have 5 minutes on the clock.
Cool. Yeah, I pretty much agree with Jimbob's characterization of naturalism. I think the word's basically useful just to distinguish itself from supernatural positions. So those would be positions that include, entities like God, angels, demons, those sorts of things. I think there's a more contentious debate about whether naturalism ought to include kind of like Platonic objects and things like that, but mine certainly doesn't. So when I'm speaking for myself, right, in my own position, which I'm happy to do, I'm not including any of that stuff. So yeah, I agree. My belief is that reality is exhausted by physical states and processes. The topic of the debate is naturalism coherent, right? And that's a fairly low bar, because coherency is just to say that the theory doesn't contain any contradictions. I don't think that Jimbob pointed out a contradiction in his opening statement, but maybe, we can talk about that maybe going on. But at least as far as I'm aware, there aren't any contradictions that I am committed to. Now, we have these further questions, right, about does naturalism provide a satisfying explanation of any of these things, like language or mental states or choices and things like that? I obviously believe that it does, right? And I guess the onus is on me maybe to provide some of those things. So it's not explicitly the debate topic. I'm more than happy to do that. So when it comes to mind, I'm an identity theorist, so I believe that mental states are identical to a certain subset of physical states. I'm a compatibilist when it comes to free will, so that means that even if causal determinism were true, I think it would be compatible with our being free, just in case we do what it is that we desire to do. Though I do believe that within the physical system called reality, that there are stochastic processes as well, but I don't think that that has any bearing really on our freedom. The important thing is that it's us who chooses, right? And then were there any other things? Propositions, I think someone can believe that entities called propositions that are mental and bear truth exist and be a naturalist. My particular theory of mind doesn't include those things, and I can motivate that in various ways, from basically Wittgenstein's private language argument, right, which states that the conclusion of which being that language is essentially public and that there isn't like a private thing called a proposition. I have various explanatory problems with these entities called propositions, but I could still believe in them and be a naturalist of a certain kind. So some people believe in something called like mentalese, right, which is to say that there's kind of semantic content to certain brain states and the way that they work, and that's a potential naturalist position for people who kind of don't like my view of language there. So yeah, that I'm happy to sort of conclude there and just get into the conversation with Jimbob about where we disagree on these things.
Okay, gentlemen, the floor is open.
Cool. Yeah, so a couple of things, like when you say a mental state, and you said they're mostly overlapped, or at least you believe them to be overlapping with physical states or brain states, or physical states, brain states, the same in your view.
And not all physical states, but a certain subset of physical states are identical to brain states. So
Okay.
what it is to be conscious is to be in a certain type of physical state.
Okay, and so in many cases, you're saying a mental state is identical to a brain state.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and are you saying that a brain state is just a brain state, but a mental state is just your way of referring to a brain state, or are they independent?
No, they're identical to each other logically. So it's sort of like asking, I mean, maybe heat's a bad example because you kind of feel heat, but it's sort of like asking, if the temperature is the mean molecular energy, well, are you saying that mean molecular energy kind of like correlates with temperature? And it's like, no, like that's literally what it is, like identical to one thing's identical to the
Okay,
other.
are you saying that your brain is identical to your mind?
Certain brain states are identical to mental states. Now, your mind, that's a tricky piece of language, right?
Well, you said
yeah.
you said they're identical, but you said also that sometimes they're not. Then is there an example of a brain state that's not identical to the mental state, which you said are identical, but sometimes they're not identical?
Yeah, that's right. So I think that there are various regions of the brain. So regions that might be called like the default mode network, or I think the cerebellum, areas involved in like motor control, which largely have nothing to do with anything psychological that we experience, right? They're just really to do with the control of like diaphragm movements and breathing and things like that.
So when you say you believe, are you actually saying your body believes, or your brain believes, or all of it believes?
I'm saying I, the person, believe. Now, if you're asking me what's my theoretical understanding of what's going on there, I mean, I think that there are certain mental states that I'm in when I say that, but I don't believe in these entities called propositions, right? So I don't think I'm expressing a proposition when I do that. I think I'm kind of using language successfully amongst other people who are trained as English speakers. So I'm able to kind of deploy words that you're also trained to understand, and you'll respond in a kind of appropriate way to the noises I make.
So could we be trained as machines to be completely incoherent if we all agree to be?
It depends what... I mean, incoherent... Someone who understood what you mean by incoherent, right, would have to be there to evaluate that,
unintelligible.
Right?
Just sounds like fart
yeah,
sounds.
I guess... Yeah, like people could just make like noises and people wouldn't be able to respond successfully to something.
Well, no, I'm saying if what you're categorizing as a successful exchange of sounds called language, shared meaning, shared identity of objects and categories and whatnot, that's merely just a predetermined training program that produced this particular way of making sounds at each other.
I think you want to be careful just with the use of words like merely and just, right? Because if my explanations are correct, then they do actually guarantee the phenomena to be described. So it's not that I deny the experience that we're having of having a conversation right now or something like that, right? I think that is happening. What I disagree with is the explanation, which involves certain entities and things, which I'm going to dispute. So I think that the just or the merely there is kind of doing rhetorical work and maybe not actually doing like theory comparison work.
Well, what I say by merely, I mean actually, like from your view, don't you have to take the position that it's just physical, just an operation, and even us as separate parts are just parts of a larger operation, and this mechanism doesn't actually produce any real knowledge, but in your view, it produces the illusion of talking about things like truth claims and propositions, and we're taught to use the laws of logic to come to any sort of conclusions, but even those are just effects that we're just we're going through the motions, and everything we're even saying here tonight just has a predetermined outcome, and it has nothing to do with what the truth actually is, because it's just kind of like it's almost just like a performance. We're living out a mechanistic, predetermined activity.
Yeah, I don't think I would agree to that. No.
Okay, So maybe do you think your view of naturalism, maybe it varies from, like the umbrella, what most people, do you get pushback from other naturalists, I guess?
Um, Only on so some naturalists will want to have entities like propositions in their view, and some naturalists might want to include abstracta, so maybe like Platonic forms, universals, or Aristotelian type things, right? And they might want to call those things naturalism, and I don't. Which I mean, I'm sort of okay because I think the use of the word is mostly to distinguish it from a position like theism, right, um, or a position like idealism, perhaps as well.
So what would be the difference between, like in my example in the opener, like the bubbling, the mechanism of a hot springs here in Colorado,
Yeah.
bubbling out from just a natural occurrence, the mechanism arised from natural events, and then the consequences of that event then has another set of things happening. So how would that actually differ from you talking and doing philosophy and getting to the bottom of a truth claim, or even what you do on your channel, like the operation of undermining someone's position? Is that just, I mean, I still don't understand from your view how you could make the distinction between the two from a position that it's just sort of mechanics.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there are a lot of differences. So, I mean, in the case of bubbling, there's probably different spatial sizes involved. I mean, the bubbles could be much smaller than me or much bigger. They're composed of different materials than the materials that I'm composed of, that have different causal powers. Presumably, there's no neural architecture involved in the bubbling. Presumably, there aren't facial movements or any of the sounds that I'm making with my voice box right now.
But you believe knowledge exists, right?
I mean, it depends. I'm not quite sure what you're asking when you say I believe knowledge exists.
Is there knowledge
do people
that you
have
obtained?
knowledge?
Yeah. Do we obtain knowledge?
Yeah, I think people have knowledge. Like I think that's true. But I think what's misguided is to think of that sentence like the having of, I don't know, like a gold bar or something. Like, do you have a gold bar, right?
Yeah.
And then the image is you've got something.
Right.
And you've placed it somewhere. Whereas I think that knowledge is a linguistic practice that humans engage in.
Right. That's what I'm saying, is that wouldn't you have to also categorize laws of logic, reasoning, meaning in the same category? That it's just like a pragmatic choice that our particular form of machine sort of formed and used.
Yeah. So I think that meaning is successful use in a linguistic practice in pretty much all cases. When it comes to the laws of logic, I mean, yeah, like, my question would be, which formal language, right?
Well, in the classical sense of just like the law of identity, non-contradiction, excluded middle, like those are preconditions, right, for us to engage in anything you're calling seeking knowledge, obtaining knowledge, right?
What do you mean by, when you say preconditions, do you mean that I have to believe in them, or do you mean like the world has to be a certain kind of way?
Both. Well, the world has to be a certain kind of way, which can be described by the laws of logic, but we also assume the laws of logic and we have access to them without describing the physical world. And so the laws of logic being that you are your own identity being, you're not me, right? Right? You believe that you're not me. So you hold a belief, right? So what I'm saying is the laws of logic are necessary preconditions. In other words, we can't actually negate them without appealing to them. We can't navigate the world without assuming them. There's no other way to do this pragmatic sort of dance in life, from your view, right? That we kind of agreed to do without laws of logic. In other words, we didn't decide on the laws of logic from your view, right?
I think we decided on the laws of logic, yeah.
Are you saying we can, if we all decide that the law of non-contradiction, we can throw it out? If we decided we can throw that out?
Yeah, I think so. There are logics that throw it out.
No, I mean like in the pursuit of like a conversation and knowledge. No, I know there's other forms of like
Oh,
fuzzy
yeah,
logic
yeah,
and
like
computing and stuff and all that
so.
in your software, but I'm talking about like, is there any way to pursue knowledge, not operations? Because in your other logic, like you're a programmer, right?
My undergrad's in software engineering, but I've just
But
finished a master's in
right,
philosophy.
right. The those kind of programs, you could change the value of things, right? And you can undermine, say, the law of probably both of them, law of non-contradiction and excluded middle. But those are for sort of like pragmatic tasks, right? But they're still guided by us, the mind, the programmer involved in doing in programming the computer to do what we want it to do, specific tasks and whatnot. But when I'm talking about the law of, let's say, identity, we can't refute or challenge any of these starting position laws of logic without assuming them, even the non-contradiction one.
Okay,
So we
I don't
didn't.
think that that's what I believe. So, I mean, imagine. So I mean, like I'm able to have a conversation right now without believing in the law of non-contradiction, right? Just in all contexts. It depends. When you say, do you believe in the law of non-contradiction? It's like, yeah, in the context of talking about particular propositional languages of logic or something. But I'm able to have this conversation, aren't I? So I don't have to have that belief in order to have the conversation.
I don't think so. I think at a fundamental level, you can't form sentences if you threw out the law of non-contradiction because of what the meaning of words are and that they are circularly defined. One can't mean the other, and you still have a coherent conversation.
Do you think I'm having a coherent conversation with you?
Yeah.
So don't you think that's in tension with the claim that I'm not having a coherent conversation with you?
Are you saying both could exist at the same time?
No, I'm saying that isn't one of those things true.
That you are, yeah, because I have laws that I can refer to that are beyond my opinions to go, okay, is he using words and sentences properly formed? Now we can argue that those things are sort of like utility based, the way we form a sentence, but the same way math, there's a form in which you write a mathematical equation as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. But the meanings of things, right? We have to assume all of those laws because if we just said if you just told me what you told me, but you swapped out every word with pineapple, there's no way it would be possible for us to communicate without somehow figuring out another system also using logic to sort of decode what you're saying. So you could actually develop pineapple language with maybe octaves and you play music, right? Like quarter tones and notes and stuff. But what I'm saying is that you stated that we can have a coherent conversation without really appealing to or believing in the law of non-contradiction. I would say the use of language itself would be a performative contradiction of that because it assumes that words can't contradict or mean each other. The same words that are said in a sentence can't all be the same words if I want to know what you're talking about.
Which do you think is the fundamental language that the propositions are in?
In which we're talking?
Yeah, like maybe like English or German.
Just natural. I mean, that's the other thing is that language itself and meaning, the meaning of words can change between languages, right? So if you were talking to someone else in Greek, maybe there's another word that they don't have that you use, but that has to get sorted out, and that's how a miscommunication happens. And so if communication is possible, I would argue that you're abiding by all three laws. Now, that doesn't mean that someone can't grasp what you're saying if maybe you use the wrong word, if we're charitable, right? Like I could say something and use the wrong use of the word in the wrong time, and you maybe having a better grasp on language would go, oh yeah, he said that, but I know what he meant, right? Like this concept of also points to a mind, right? That's appraising and making sense of what's coming out of my mouth, which I think from your view, sounds would just be sort of like this consequence of like a process. Not only is the exchange and the meaning we share just a consequence of a natural event of just us existing, but we don't even really have a choice in the matter to word things a certain way with any intent. right? Because predeterminism would say otherwise. We would just be kind of pulling from our mechanism, where whatever bank that is, right? And the gears are shifting, and I'm just pulling, and now you're going to pull some stuff, and it's going to come out of your mouth. I just still don't see how, like a brain kind of looks like like an intestines kind of, right? And so I feel like from a naturalist perspective, there's no real difference between my stomach processing physical food and passing gas, and the brain processing external inputs and then doing the same input. We just happen to call that language. Is there anything that distinguishes the truth, the description of you as a mechanism, as me as a mechanism, as the world as a mechanism? Is there anything that distinguishes that from just everyday life just happening, like the natural world, like trees falling and things like that? Because I haven't heard a distinction that that gives us any knowledge or priority to adhere to any sort of coherency or abide by any laws in which we discover what is true. And yet here we are arguing, is naturalism coherent, which assumes a whole set of metaphysical things, which from your view would just be consequences. So like meaning, information, laws of logic. Is there any way to not just consider them as just consequences of the natural world from your view?
I mean, they're all nothing over and above parts of the natural world on my view, because my view is naturalism, right?
So is there any difference between your view and my view, actually?
Not in terms of the phenomena we're trying to explain, but I think in terms of ontological commitments, yes.
But I mean, knowledge. Like, is there any truth to your position? Is there any methodology? Right. This is the other problem I brought up in the opener. If you're opinion A, Nathan, and you're just a mechanism and an output, and I'm opinion B, I'm just a mechanism and an output, then the selector, the listener, and we can also be selectors of our own or words, right? We say something and we go, hey, maybe that's not exactly true or accurate. If the selector is also just a mechanism, then by what standard do we have to even pursue knowledge claims, right? It seems like there's a big problem there because the selector is also just a mechanism.
Why is that a problem? Sorry, I don't.
Oh, because if opinion A is a mechanism, just an output, right? Predetermined words coming out. And then the other opinion is, then the selector, right? The selector who's listening to both and making a determination. Like we listen, like you do critiques on people, right? You do critiques on a lot of theists, even a lot of some atheists you go after. But your mind is actually going through the information and the set of propositions and the consequences of a certain view, right? And you're assessing and you're making value claims on it, value judgments on it, in order to go, no, that's not it, right? Or in some cases, yes, that is it, right? So what I mean by the selector is the mind, right? That's apprehending the external world, claims, truth claims, all of these things, and then putting them through our processor system to determine whether it's true or not, whether it's absurd or not, whether it's whether we like it or not. I mean, it even would apply to our preferences, right? So I'm not sure how your position can get out of the category of a mere preference, which itself would be illusory, because you wouldn't actually be preferring it it would just be kind of like I like what I'm saying, right? Or I feel compelled to say what I'm saying. So I guess a simple question is, do you actually think about and choose what you're saying?
Yes.
And why is that? Or how is that? If you yourself, the mind, is just a physical state, a brain state.
I think that the how question, it depends on what sort of answer you want. I mean, I think it's largely a question for neuroscientists, but from my point of view, like that just is what I do, right?
But the neuroscientist, according to your own view, is just following through on his mechanistic outcomes and outputs. He's not really going through the process and appraising anything in particular. He's just doing his thing. So, like a Sam Harris, I don't know if you're still a fan of him, but from his view, there's nothing really going on. He's subject to the same conclusion he's making about the world as everyone else. So, I don't understand how it's possible that you are making a choice about anything, because under your view, I still don't know who you is. I don't know what that is. If you is just a physical brain state, then am I really talking to just the mechanics, just the physicality of Nathan's brain, and not Nathan as you are today? You're just kind of like a skin suit.
So I think you're confusing the phenomena with the explanation again. I would say you are talking to me, and we both know perfectly well what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have specifically different explanations that we give as to that, right? I don't think
the question is the explanation itself. I don't think, based on your view, if I were to adopt your view, there wouldn't really be any difference between your explanation and mine, because it would just be a physical outcome of a process.
There wouldn't. I don't think there would be. I mean, I hope there's not difference in the phenomena that we're supposed to explain, because then that means that maybe you don't think we're having a conversation or something. And I don't know. I think both our explanations are capable of explaining the things that we see. The point just is, well, then which of them is a better explanation, and then we have to look at the virtues of.
But that's the thing, is that the selector, once you say, okay, your view is this, your explanation is this, and mine is this, and all we have to do is determine what's better, right? What's a better one? And but I'm saying that method itself would just be more of the previous. There would be no difference between valuing two different positions, one over the other, and actually making the position. It would just be more just kind of like human noise, sounds, and so that's the problem with, I think, the view, is that the selector itself, which can be yourself, by the way, like you were a theist, right, at some point, right? So did you select non-theism at some point through some sort of appraisal process?
I think the reason that I deconverted was probably irrational, right? I don't think it was irrational, and I don't think it was probably because of reasons in the first place.
So you take the view that you do make choices, but ultimately that experience is kind of illusory.
No, I think we do make choices.
How does a mechanism make a choice if it's just a mechanism?
Like this, I'm going to choose to pick up a pen, right?
But if it's predetermined, did you choose that?
Yes.
If it's predetermined, then predeterminism in that instance isn't the case, right? You're actually intervening on predeterminism?
No, because I don't believe that what it means to so we might disagree about what it means to make a choice, right? But I don't believe that what it means to make a choice is to do something that you otherwise that is grounded in a way such that you could have done something alternative. I believe that what it means to be free to do something is that you're doing what you desire to do. So like Calvinists, right? For example, God.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting. You guys do a good job demolishing Calvinists, but I don't see your view
but
as
Calvinists
too much different.
Agree with me.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, is that I don't see a difference between your views.
Well, right there for just a second. We're going to leave it for just a quick second. I have to get through a few of these super chats. We'll get so bogged down near the end of the debate that we are not actually going to be able to get to them all. For $10, Risky Dave says, great channel. We appreciate that. Joe R. for $9.11 says, nice that Banhammer was doing the Lord's work. I do love that Banhammer. Everybody loves that Banhammer.
Everyone loves the ability.
Everybody loves the band. You just got to help people out the door sometime. Grays174 for $5 says, is Trinitarianism coherent? Also, thanks for the show, everyone involved. For $10, for whoever is folding the chairs at the end of the debate. I thought that was pretty good. And Jacob V for $5 says, I like my mythological Christian superheroes raw, served with bacon, eggs, hash brown, salt, pepper, black tea, and a side of stupid. Thanks, Jim Bob. You're already making fans and winning over people. So we have a few more ahead of that, but we're caught up enough where we can keep the show going. Sorry to cut in. This is normally where I tell everybody to like, share, and subscribe anyway. So go ahead and continue, guys.
Yeah, it's all right. No problem.
I forgot where we were. I think what I'm kind of focusing on is that I'm sorry. Just could you have not picked up the pen? I didn't want to misinterpret what you were saying. In that moment, could you have not?
Yeah, I'm sort of not sure, because I do believe that there are stochastic processes.
Can you tell me what that stochastic means? I don't know what it means.
Yeah, so just probabilistic. So I believe that there are probabilistic physical causes, but I sort of think it's a bit of a red herring to the free will discussion, because my view of my being free doesn't depend upon there being stochastic processes at all. So when I say I'm not sure, right? I'm genuinely not sure, because I just don't know if there are stochastic causal processes in. But I can pretend. I can say I can sort of commit myself to saying that I am sure and I couldn't have done otherwise, right? And say that I was free if I was certain that I couldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah, I feel like that the position itself, you'd need to have some sort of like time travel to actually know for certain, right? If you could have done better or you could have done it or not, because the moment we do something, we can look back and go, I could have done something, but that time has passed. So
right.
Logically, you couldn't have done because it's already passed. But that's not the reason that some people conflate that. Doesn't it?
You have
seem
to
like
index it to the time.
Right.
You have to say at that time,
right.
whatever.
Right.
Could you have done otherwise? That's
right. Because I look at it like, could we actually drive off into the oncoming traffic? Like we could, right? But we could also not. And so all of our choices, at least in my view, every naturalist I talk to or physicalist, I don't know if you make those synonymous in your view, but
I do, but a lot of people take issue with that. So
okay, yeah, they kind of grant the experience of choosing, but they don't grant that they're actually choosing, right? So they go, yeah, it was me who chose. Like in your case, it seems like that's kind of your view, that you did an action that you in past tense describe as you choosing, but in the present tense, it's really not you doing anything, because in your view, you're not aware of all of the other variables that could very well be imposed on you that you're not certain of. And because you have no free will, even the pursuit of knowing the variables, right, would be outside of your free will to do so. So you couldn't even really pursue, right, as your own investigator of your own mechanism, because it would be you, the mechanism, investigating the mechanism. So, like, I just don't, I don't think most people live consistently. Would you agree that people don't generally live consistently with the logical conclusions of naturalism? Like day to day?
On that last question, no. On the first point that you were raising, I think the philosophical problem you raised is actually contradictory, right? So you said a lot of naturalists will say, I was choosing, but it's not me actually choosing. But I would just break that down into the claim, I'm choosing and I'm not choosing, right? And I don't think it's true that I'm choosing and not choosing at the same time. And I think that word actually is actually being used to kind of smuggle in your view, and maybe like a kind of question begging or something. Like, well, you say it's me, you'll say it's me who's choosing, but you're not choosing in the sense I want to argue for. Therefore, you're kind of wrong, right? And I think that you kind of, you know.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, because well, there's two things. When I use actually, it's funny because actual in some sense would mean purely material and physical, but in another sense, the only actual of you choosing would be a non-physical thing. I would call the mind or your being, right? Something that can actually override mechanisms, right? So, and that brings back to like mental states. I don't think, and it's okay if you haven't yet, maybe there's an argument in the future, the difference between a mental state and a brain state, which you said is always the same, but you also said in some cases it's not the same. And so I'm not sure.
So a subset relation would be the way to think about this, right? So brain states are a superset of mental states, according to me.
Okay, so what's a mental state? If mental actually means mind, do you reject the mind?
No, I'm not an eliminativist, though I could be persuaded of that should be eliminated in a future completed neuroscience or something. I think it's a very interesting position, actually, and maybe some of my views about language could motivate that. But I'm currently not an eliminativist, and so I do, I just kind of say that mental states, there are the kind of labels that we apply to certain mental states. There's a resemblance class of physical states that are those mental states that are in those resemblance classes.
Okay, would that mean that what you call coming to agreement about something that's true, is that just an overlap of almost identical mental states between two people who have entirely different mechanisms?
I don't think people have to be in the same mental state exactly to be in agreement. So I think being in agreement is a type of linguistic activity where people are going to sort of nod their heads and say, I agree, or something like that. That's what I think being in agreement
Does
is.
that mean that the truth is in agreement?
Well, I think even given your view, you would say that people can agree but both be wrong.
Yes.
So
it's not. So it's not. The truth isn't an agreement, right?
Well, it's true that they agree if they agree.
But what they're talking, like, we can't agree on something being true just by agreeing on it, right?
But the way the world is, according to me, is independent of our beliefs about it. If that's the question that you're asking.
Well, the world has to be a certain way for you to come to a conclusion about how you see the world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, so there's something that's true independent of what we believe to be the case, but what we believe could be true. It's just that they're not identical.
So when you say there's something that's true independent of what we believe,
right? A precondition before, if preconditions exist for thinking and you coming to any sort of notion of truth or describing anything at all, if there are preconditions, those preconditions must be in effect and in a sense true. You would maybe first even describe them as they are. It could be the laws of physics. Obviously I include the law of identity, mathematics, coherence theory, correspondence theory together before you, because the process of you coming to any sort of opinion, again, in your view, is an output. Something else has to be true before that, which is not an agreement. Right? We didn't agree the preconditions of existing, right?
No, but what I was going to talk about is that I think there's something there's a kind of philosophical confusion here, which is to think that so according to my view, right, something like saying that's true is something that humans do, or something that at least people who are trained in our linguistic practices. So maybe you could argue that you can train machines, but they don't have mental states. I mean, let's park all that conversation. The point is that it's the thing that certain things do, saying true, right? But then I believe that the world is a certain way, independently of whether or not anyone kind of talks about it in that particular way, right? That's a belief that I have. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're kind of asking me, is it true that the world was that way before there were any minds? My answer is yes, right? But then if you're kind of asking me a question about the practice of saying true at that time, then I'm not going to say that that's true at that time, because you need to have the people around who are engaged in who are engaged in that discourse. Now, you could ask a kind of counterfactual claim of, could it be the case if there were people around at that time to talk about true in that way? Would it be right?
Right. Yeah. No, I understand. You're saying like if it's just minds plural dependent, right? Because you could just exist alone potentially, and you wouldn't know what agreement is. Actually, you wouldn't have this process of like output A, output B, and then you going, oh well, no, maybe I'm wrong about this, right? But this is what I'm trying to get to is like I don't quite get your methodology, and watching you, I know you do go through this process of determining whether something's right or wrong, not like morally, but you probably do that in your life, obviously, and so there's a method, right, that you do that, but you also, have the position that that method itself is sort of an agreement. So it seems to be like that seems incoherent to me, because if you are in fact pursuing things and measuring propositions and things people say and whether it's true, and you actually know the process of using logic and rationale and reasoning to kind of go through this, like what's the channel you guys sometimes go on? It's way more boring than your channel, and street epistemology, like sort of methodology, right? This is assuming that it's not just a made up process, that it doesn't matter what your opinion is about about truth. There is in fact truth that, yes, is mind dependent, but independent of opinion, right? So there would be this distinction between opinion and the truth, right? But it seems that from your starting point, that there really isn't necessarily a difference between what you prefer to believe as true and what I prefer to believe as true.
I think there is a difference between what people prefer to believe as true.
No, I mean, the difference I'm saying is that it is true. Something is true independent of our preference of believing one or the other.
Yeah, I believe that, yeah.
Okay, so there is a truth. You agree it's mind dependent, which means it can't be a mechanism.
No, I think our believing it's true is mind dependent, right? So you can't. Yeah. But I don't believe that the thing that's being described is mind dependent. I think that's mind independent.
So there's a thing that might be true, regardless of a mind being able to apprehend it as true.
Right.
Like the rock, or no, yeah. It wouldn't be called a rock then, would it?
It wouldn't be called a rock, but this is the point, that you can't describe it without describing it from within a language, right?
Right.
So
right. So
and I think that this is where some of the confusion comes in thinking about those types of states, because you have to use a language in order to describe the state. And the language is dependent upon our practices, obviously, because as you say, like our languages change over time and things like that, and there's different languages, and
Okay, so let's take me being opinion B out, and it's just you. With time to think, and you hold two contradictory positions in your head, and you kind of fully grasp them, right? You thought them out. Now, which is the selector, being that your brain, which is, in your view, the overlap or identical qualities or whatnot, properties of a mental and brain state, if you are also the selector and you hold two views at the same time, that you can actually kind of like really flesh out and almost be tempted by either, right? What is significantly different about the selector in that case that determines which of the two is valid or coherent?
Okay, so I just want to make sure I've understood what you're asking me. So you're saying that there's two contradictory propositions, and someone is kind of undecided between the two. And are you asking me, was that right in the first place?
Actually, we could even start it before knowing they're contradictory. Let's say you hold two different positions.
So but they are contradictory, but contradictory, but you're kind of drawn to each.
Yeah, and you're gonna select one as Nathan, as you describe you as a mind, but also a mechanism. And what's the selector? What is it, and how is it different or more valuable or valid than the two opinions, which is also held by the mechanism and the mind?
Yeah, it's kind of I'm still not 100% sure what the question is, but the selector, I would say, is me. Like, I think the appropriate word to use are the words that we use reflexively to refer to ourselves, like I or myself or I, and so I would say, it's me who chooses. Now, now you could ask me, well, like maybe like a Freudian psychologist on the couch. Well, what happens when you choose? And I might describe what it's like for me to choose between two things.
No, I'm not asking that. I'm asking, why is that third selector you call me, as you put it, it would still be me. It's the same me that's holding the two positions, right? It's the same one. It's not. Are they different brain states? Is it a different brain state who has you go, no, believe A, right? Believe A. Is it like this multiple personality thing? Like what I'm asking is, it seems that in your view, the me that you're referring to, the I, the mind, is holding position A and B, but your selector, who ends up being maybe on a higher pedestal, I don't have any reason from your view to understand, right, why the selector takes priority if it's just another output, right?
Okay, so that would be to do with the organizational hierarchy in the brain, on my view. And so it would be to say that, I mean, a good example maybe of what you're describing would be the visual system in the brain. So there are lots of different weightings of patterns of the things that we're seeing that come in through our neurons. And then there are certain regions of the brain that actually, interestingly, are very well modeled by Bayesian statistics, right? Which is quite fascinating. But the point is that these different weightings come through, and then there's a region that kind of selects between the weightings.
So
right?
it's your brain.
And
It's not really the Nathan.
No, it is me that does it. If you're asking me in the ordinary sense, but
Right,
if you're asking me from for the physical explanation of what's happening, that's the physical explanation. But I wouldn't deny the linguistic practice of saying
Okay,
I do it.
so let me get this. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Is that you had a position A and B, and maybe they have tension or whatever, and you're exploring whether they have tension and whether they can be reconciled or whatever, or you're going to choose one. Now you're saying selector C is just a mechanistic result of the way your brain creates hierarchical patterns of language, maybe categories, but are you saying the act of creating that hierarchy is identical to the act of valuing something, right? Because it seems to me, and I think you would agree, is that there are people like me who you disagree with my worldview. You would probably look at me and say, no, he's just incorrectly creating, his brain is actually incorrectly creating this hierarchy. But if that's the case, I'm not actually choosing, right? There's nothing you could actually say to have my mechanism, the brain, who's in my view not identical to the I, but merged in some way. I couldn't actually choose a different hierarchical building system that you're referring to. If I were to grant you this hierarchical system is the physical process of valuing, in this case, C, right? You deliberated, let's say. So are you saying deliberation, in your view, in your practice, is just waiting for the brain to kind of follow through with the processing of multiple things at the same time, or?
I think the metaphor of waiting for the brain is apt to lead us astray, right? Because who's waiting, right? So I wouldn't want to say something like that. I think maybe where some of the confusion here is coming out is the difference between what we might call semantic reduction and ontological reduction, right? So obviously I have to use words to refer to things. I can't tell you about things without telling you something and using words. So I'm using words to describe my ontology, which is comprised of physical things like the brain and nothing more, nothing over and above that. But then in our ordinary linguistic practices, there are all sorts of things that my ontology explains, which I would say are our ordinary practices, right? So like talking about things like using a word I or myself or choosing whatever. And those exist in our normal linguistic practice, and I agree that phenomena exists. But I don't think our ordinary linguistic practice includes providing explanations from the ontological standpoint of physicalism. I just don't think that that's what we do, and I think to get confused between the two is
yeah. I mean, I might be very well confused between the two, but I guess I'm trying to get to is that if you're saying the selector is just a mechanistic organization that creates hierarchy, basically of meaning, right? So it's not to say that just because your brain creates even quickly a hierarchy that resolves the differences between A and B, these ideas you're holding, that it can't be wrong. And then it brings up another question. Well, how do you know C is correct? And it seems like an endless sort of tower of hierarchies that your brain has to keep considering and constructing, but it's not. Is there a you then criticizing the C, right? Does that make sense? Is there a you criticizing then C, or is it just more of C going further in and criticizing it or itself? Does that make sense to you? It's kind of confusing with the letters, but
So I actually think in the description I provided, having so when I'm talking about the organizational architecture of the brain, right? I'm just saying that there are modules that are involved in discriminating between different patterns of weighting. Now, that doesn't mean that that module is the thing that's giving you the experience. I think that could be a separate part of the brain, which accompanies that part of the brain that's doing the choosing, whatever. I don't think that leads to an infinite regressive hierarchy, because I think just having the one thing would be enough to explain the choice that's being made.
well, no, not I agree with that. Explain, yeah, but no, it's true that you came to the conclusion between the two. Let's say it was a A and B. It wasn't a matter of like ice cream flavors. It was like you were doing a logical little logical system where you were actually coming up with, like, you took a test in high school or whatever. Like, it's not an opinion. You're prioritizing something, but there is something about C, the selector, that in my view must be at least different than what's constructing A and B, because it's
also different on my view.
Okay. Yeah, so what you're saying from your view is you hold A and B, but I'm saying even coming to the proposition of idea A and B, it seems like it would also be a version of what you're describing C as, of something previous, right?
I'm not sure. Maybe you could help me by helping me understand how your theory solves this problem.
Of coming to the conclusion. Well, I would use like coherency, which wouldn't be my opinion, or I would use logic and go, well, I have to abide by the law of identity, non-contradiction, and it would probably, if it was in some sort of form, like in a propositional form, there are rules, and we would abide by those to come to some conclusion. And any opinion I had would show up as a blemish probably in that process. And so, but if that were the case, I would still be at some point appealing to or submitting to a law, right? A law that goes beyond my opinions about things, right? So, but if what you're saying is true, that we largely just make up logic and make up all the rules, then there isn't any real absolute foundation for epistemology or knowledge. We're just kind of in this process of kind of, I wouldn't even call it making determinations, because I think from your view it would just be sort of like this mechanistic feedback loop where it's like, here's an input, here's my output, here's my output. But then our outputs are also inputs for other people, and this is what you would call a conversation, I think, from your view. So I mean, I hope you understood what I was asking, like about the two potentially contradictory or let's say positions.
I could provide the answer that you just gave me, though, right? I could say, well, when I make a choice, right, I believe what it's coherent for me to believe, given my other reasons and beliefs. But the question that you're asking me isn't about what it's like for me from the intentional stance. The question was about the ontological grounding from the physical stance, so not from my own point of view. So the question I'm asking you is that same question that you're asking me.
But
so I'm wondering, is there a soul, for example, involved?
Well, but isn't your position identical to the physical view?
I mean, I think I've answered quite a lot of your questions, and I would like for you to answer my question.
Mm-hmm. What I believe that there's a mind. I believe in there's something about us. There's like an essence to us that's not identical to our brain state. Like, I don't have access to your brain right now, right? I can't look at your brain, but I could know the kind part of you. I could know the part of you that's like me, that gets angry or whatever, and so I can see the humanness in you. So from my view, where you and I are both made in the image of God, and we have access to supernatural things. That is not to say I don't know if supernatural to you necessarily means what it means to me, but I would consider even things like information. When we say all things are physical, and you said you are a physicalist, there are things like that are clearly not physical that we have access to. And so from that view, my worldview permits an ultimate source for those supernatural preconditions for us to be even able to talk with each other.
So I'm not sure that answers the question that you posed to me, though, because we can
Oh.
say, suppose there's a soul substance, right? An immaterial soul substance that's mental. And this soul substance has two beliefs that it doesn't know are contradictory, but it's entertaining, A and B. And now there's a part of that soul that's choosing between them. Now, is that a different thing? Or is it I don't see how there isn't just a complete parity between the kind of question you raised for me and your preferred theory?
I guess maybe it's not a perfect analogy, but maybe in your world, there's a difference between the computer mechanics and hardware of the computer and the information that's passing through the computer. Right. So
it's all a physical state to me.
Right, but meaning and information isn't physical.
Information is physical by Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication. And also all the definitions used in physics as a measure of entropy are physical. So, for example, yeah.
Can you give me one example of information that's physical?
Yeah, a rusted car.
What is a rusted car?
A state of entropy.
Right, but you know what a car is, but the information car is not identical to the car, right?
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are
In
you
other
asking
words,
me if
someone-
my word is identical?
Well, yeah, the way we use meaning and information is we transpose it onto physicality, and the physicality is never identical to the meaning or the information we attribute. So information requires a coder, an encoder, and a decoder, and what you're doing is confusing the medium through which information is moves between minds. And you're confusing the medium, the thing, right, with the information about the thing. So rusty.
Would I say that the word I used is the thing it refers to?
Would you say what?
Would I say that the word I used is the thing it referred to?
Well, if you said a rusty car is information, yes, you would be saying they were the same.
I'd be saying that the word is the same as the car. The word information is the car.
You'd be saying the car itself is the information rusty. That the object over there is the information rusty car.
Right. The thing being referred to. So I've got to distinguish between the sentences I utter and the things that I refer to with those sentences. Right?
For instance, if I say the word is the medium, the sound, identical to the meaning?
And the conditions of use of the meaning, right? So just in case I take it the way you intend, I've understood what you've said.
Right, but if I say chair, the sound chair and the sound of our ugly English language chair is not identical to a wooden chair.
No.
But it's information. I'm giving you information, right?
So there's something called there's a semantic definition of information, is semantic information that some people use, which is to be distinguished from Shannon's use and the use in physics. Because I don't believe in propositions in the theoretical sense. Obviously, I believe in propositions in the ordinary sense of like I just provided you with a proposition or something. Mm-hmm. I don't believe in semantic information either, right? So my semantics are reducible to activities. So I reduce.
You go to pragmatic information. That's like
I wouldn't say information, but I reduce semantics to a type of activity. So so the skill of being able to make shapes with my mouth that pass air through and things like that, and getting people to respond in the way.
Yeah, those to me are mediums, and you need for information you need two minds. And you need a medium to transfer, but the two minds have to understand what the code of that information is. But the code of the information, what the meaning is not identical to the physicality of the medium. So, sound waves from our vocal cords that kind of perturbate the air and hit someone's ear is never identical to the meaning that's passing through. Right? These are from the naturalist view. You can justify the mechanism that we have, the hardware, the medium that we're able to use, but the existence of the meaning between two minds is immaterial, and so is the actual transmission, right? The medium's not immaterial, right? There's a sound wave, but the meaning is never identical. And so when people say information is material, I think they're skipping a massive step, and I think it's a major problem because you can give various examples, and almost every single one I've ever interacted with, someone presents the medium as the information, and the information is never exactly identical to the thing that's that we sort of slap the word onto. Rust, what rust is and what it means, the information rust is within a larger context, a larger web of belief and knowledge. It such that we can even identify it as a thing called rust. But the rust, the physical rust on the car, nowhere in the physical of rust does there exist the meaning rust or the reference of rust, right? There's just physical. It's just physical, and maybe we have a reference point. It like looks like a rock or something, something's happening to it. But this concept of categorizing rust or even a car, it's completely immaterial. It's like mind. It's like a mind web. We all share these identities over time. It requires induction. It requires that the past is like the present and the present's like the future. That the word car and rust maintain their meaning, right? And rust, the same concept of rust in maybe like Papua New Guinea. Maybe they think a rusty car is like an old dead god or something like that, right? So the information, if information was material and rusty car was a piece of information, then someone who's never seen a rusty car would somehow come to the conclusion of a rusty car because it's embedded in the physical.
Okay.
So that was a pretty short response. Do we feel like we've come to the end of this thing, Nathan? Or we're not getting anywhere, or where are we at here?
I guess I think there's a quite a lot to unpack in what Jimbob's saying, right? And I'm not even really sure where to begin. Like that there's so much. I mean, one thing could be to do with the way that as he's expressing his position, he's sort of just asserting it, right? But he's not really providing reason. He's just saying, look, and this is how it is, but not providing reasons to support that, and not genuinely engaging in theory comparison, I think, with the alternative candidate choice. So most of the things, for example, that are said of my theory are not things that I agree to. So I'm listening to lots of things being said that I just don't believe, right? And it's like, well, which one of those am I supposed to respond to? Like all 20? It's very...
Well, I'm sorry if that was like a big gish gallop. I didn't mean that. I just was passionate about the distinction between matter as it is and our descriptions of matter, which I believe assume a whole other set of things that just are not matter.
I know that's your view, right? But I mean, I think if the concern is to understand what my view is, and it could be the case that because it's not your view, you don't understand it yet or something, and I'm prepared to like help you understand it. But I also think I've said enough that you could charitably construct what it is that I believe out of the things that I've said.
Yeah, I mean, I was a physicalist and a naturalist. You know, I'm an oldie. I'm an old fart. So I mean, I passionately would argue with my dad about physicalism, and everything.
Well, but what about? I mean, my position, for example, like how would I respond to the things that you just said?
Well, you would, if your claim is information is material, and your example is a rusty car, and I point out that...
Well, I think there's... Well, firstly, I wouldn't accept the equivocation on information going on there, right? Because a rusty car is information in the sense that a physicalist is talking about it, but you're talking about semantic information, right? So I draw that distinction, which I think is very important for answering the question.
Okay. We can go to like... Let's say this, and you probably heard this line, this road before. It's like you accept meaning and language, of course, but you use it you adopt it in a pragmatic sense that it's useful to kind of describe things, and then we agree on descriptions and so forth. But things like mathematics, numbers, you wouldn't like. We would probably both agree 7 doesn't exist in the way a physicalist would say things exist, right?
Yeah, it's according to me, it's a discourse that people have. Yeah,
and 7 is not identical to a brain state, right?
It's 7 is a thing people say. It's not like, I mean, there are certain brain states that people are in when they do maths sometimes.
But we all know what 7 means, as long as we understand the character, right?
I have no idea what other people have in mind when they say 7 to me. Someone could be saying 7 and
right.
feel pain, right? Someone could be saying 7 and have the color red in mind. Someone could be saying 7 and have nothing in mind. They could be a pea zombie.
Right. But the concept 7, if someone said there's 7 of them over there, we wouldn't be like, oh, you're feeling
I'd know
pain.
how to respond. Well, exactly. I wouldn't respond that way,
right,
because of my training around how to use the number 7. But that doesn't mean I know anything about what's going on in their head.
Right. But the concept of 7 could sound like, saxophone could have replaced 7, right? So I understand you were trained for the character and the sound 7 to mean a certain thing in the context of math, right? Counting things. So we're not talking about the character itself 7, but the meaning of 7 in number theory, in our way to talk about numbers in mathematics. We all know what we mean by 7, right?
Yes, I agree with that.
Right.
And what did I say meaning was earlier in the conversation?
I forgot. You can remind me.
I said that meaning was successful use.
Successful use, right. So successful meaning one brain understands the meaning of a singular thing or a collection of words.
No.
Between what do you mean by successful?
So by successful, I mean that you use the language as a tool to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So so the other person will respond in the way that you want by using that word as a tool.
Oh, so you could just use it with you could just use any sounds as long as it fulfilled the arbitrary goal.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so are you saying the pursuit of knowledge and its methodology is arbitrary?
It depends what you mean by arbitrary there, because I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Like arbitrary in what sense? Like it doesn't matter, or?
Yeah, like in other words, things need to mean something regardless of the arbitrary goal, right? So when you say successful, it means like I have a goal X. Let me use language to get to goal X, and you kind of see it like a sort of like a programming system. And you could kind of alter the meanings of X and Y and such. But I'm talking about the shared meanings between people. If the goal is to get to the truth, right? Two people have to actually share the same meaning, even if they have different arbitrary goals on the side. Like, say, someone has a goal to win, but they also want to argue for the truth, right? So they have multiple goals in mind. When we are arguing right now, we're both agreeing. Are we both agreeing on the goal to get to the truth of whether naturalism is coherent?
I think so. I mean, I think that, I'm not sure. Maybe your goal is this, but I think your goal might be to sort of try to maybe humiliate a position that isn't theism, or to show how weak it is. Maybe this isn't your goal, though, but I kind of overwhelmingly get the sense from the people who are supporters of the kind of precept view that is their goal, to sort of try to humiliate the alternative view.
I sympathize with your categorization. You're wrong about me particular, but the people that are generally maybe in and around the communities and they show up, some of them are volatile, and I would agree that they actually occur that way. So I'll grant you that exists. I'm just telling you that that's not my intention. I don't want to humiliate you or anything. I want to extrapolate what naturalism is, and then I want to come to the logical consequences of it. And ultimately, I would want you to abandon it regardless if I ended or buttoned with the olive branch of any particular theological position. I think the naturalist position, as it stands alone, should be rejected, just because I don't think that you can account for, again, the selector, as we talked about.
Hang on, we're at an hour 15 in. Nathan does have a train to get on. He has to go buy a new shirt, right? So we've got to get to the closing statements and the super chats, guys.
Well, I think that the reason I did this is, I mean, my part of my view is that what motivates some presuppers, and perhaps not Jimbob, given what he just said, right, is this idea that in order to be masculine and tough, you have to be able to shut up the non-believer and have the laws of logic and all this. And I've definitely got that sense from the chat. And someone's like, Nathan needs to have some stakes and weights, right? It's like, you know, people don't know that. Like, I trained MMA for years. Like, I got cauliflower ears, a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, I'm fairly jacked. I've got a really good 5K time. And I love trans people and don't think the laws of logic exist, right? Like, all of these things can be true at the same time. You don't need to, you don't need to ground your sort of like masculine insecurities in these things.
Wait, Nathan, are you saying that you took off your shirt to own the chat?
That's right.
Okay, fair enough.
Own the conservatives.
Yeah, I'm not really following, but it's all right. We're gonna move into closing statements.
They get it.
Nathan,
they get it.
We'll start with you.
If I took off my shirt, it would look like the light went out.
Well, that's probably what it looks like with me, right? Like, well, not the like the lights, all being reflected back. Okay, so I guess in terms of the debate topic, right, is naturalism coherent? I don't think that there has been a kind of contradiction generated for naturalism, and so I mean, I think that just by default sort of means that I win. But I think that the framing of like winning and losing debates is unhelpful. I kind of hope that Jimbob has a better understanding of my position and what it is and what I've got to say. I am interested in what his alternative is as well, because I think that there's a lot of effort spent by people, particularly theists, but people who reject naturalism, in pointing out that there are, certain problems for the position or difficulties in understanding it. But then very little is said about how alternative explanations actually do anything better. So, for example, all the problems that were raised for my physicalism are true of solely substances, right? Like about how they choose and what the processes are involved and so on. Or how theism actually makes sense of any of this, what it is about, God's causal powers and God's decisions, which is supposed to explain any of this better than the natural alternative. So, those are basically just my closing thoughts on the discussion, and hopefully I've shown that we can divorce the discussion about what's true from kind of like masculine chest thumping and stuff like that as well, which it has just got very well. It has a lot to do with it, but it shouldn't.
Well,
I feel like you started it though, right? Like the masculine.
I was reacting to the chat.
Okay, fair enough.
I will not be
the
doing
shirt's
any.
off, and he's like, "I won." That's a Chad moment, I guess, right? It's just.
I
can
can't
go all the way and get my dick out like that.
Oh my God! No, don't do that. For the love of God, don't do that. Jimbob, you're up with your closing.
Well, I've long given up on the masculine chest thumping. I have really narrow shoulders. It just looks like I'm dancing. So I'm not going to do that. As far as naturalism being coherent or not, I think what I was trying to point to, whether it was effective or not, is that naturalism itself can't account for why coherentism, or why being coherent is even required at all, or how you could get to it, being that it's purely a mechanistic world. It's a machine that is just output, input, including us as individuals. Our brains are simply taking in, processing, putting out. So there's no priority. There's no third party. Again, the reference to selector C. If opinion A in naturalism is me saying stuff, and opinion B is under naturalism is Nathan saying stuff, then under naturalism, selector C is also just another opinion. There's no way to determine the veracity between A and B, because C itself is just another form of A and B. In my view, in my critique of naturalism, no different than a blade of grass growing, bubbles coming from a hot spring, lightning, pure mechanics, right? And so I thought Nathan did a good job of explaining what he believes in a calm, collective way, which I appreciate. But I think there might be something for him to pursue as far as understanding in a very clear way the difference between a mental state and a brain state, if in fact he stated to start that the mental and the brain states are identical, but he also said that they're sometimes not identical. And so that's a contradiction. It could be nuanced, one, right? There could be just like some, but I really didn't get the sense that, in my view, categorizing things as mental states and brain states is just another path, way linguistically of categorizing mind versus brain. And I think Nathan showing up, having his opinions, having his opinions change over time. I think he does know that there is something that maybe his physical, his position can't justify, called the mind, but he doesn't quite know how to put it because it's never identical to matter, right? It's something about us as beings that are able to sort of navigate truth and figure out and choose things. And I think he does accept choosing, which is good. I just think choice is incompatible with naturalism and physicalism. Any version of predeterminism, saying something's a choice is basically just writing a headline about something that happened. Not really. And then from there, there's a whole other part two of this, which is like, what are the moral implications that no one actually chooses their behaviors, right? But that's a whole other thing. And that's been exhausted probably too, especially Nathan has probably been through that a million times. So.
Well, appreciate the closing statement from both of you gentlemen. Appreciate the lively debate. It was very interesting. Your links will both be down in the chat. I did want to go through the Q&A for both of you guys. If you just got a few more minutes, Nathan.
Yeah, I can do like, I think 20 minutes or something should be fine for the Q&A.
Okay, great. Sounds good. So I would like to actually see a part two of this, exactly how you said, where you can actually take on Jimbob's position. I think that would also be interesting if you're so inclined down the road. 21 SNC says for $7 Canadian. Thanks, Andrew and the Crucible, for being the best debate channel on YouTube. Jimbob folding chairs all night. Well, we appreciate that. For $2, Rich says, does Digital Guy believe he exists?
I mean, I'm a naturalist, right? By which I believe I don't exist and the universe popped into existence out of nothing and it's okay to kill babies. So I don't
know. Does Digital eat soy?
That's right. Yeah. All I eat is soy and estrogen. I'm on a hormone replacement therapy and I hope to get my breast implant soon.
I hear that those cost a lot more than an abortion, though. Just
unfortunately, but I've had enough money for 7 of them.
All right. Actually, a pretty good sport about all this shit, Nathan. It's kind of.
Oh, I like your. By the way, Nathan, I liked your critique on Jordan Peterson sitting with Jonathan Peugeot. That was enjoyable for me, even. So.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Zen Shapiro for $5 says, Nathan, that your material cells replace itself entirely every few years. Are you still the same you that you were 7 years ago?
In a sense, yes, and in another sense, no. Right? I'm not composed of the same cells, but I am me, and I would refer to me still.
So for $100 Czech dollars, which is I think $4 American, are there laws of mentation according to which our minds operate? If not, why don't I choose turnip out of A or B? If yes, why could those laws not be identical to a subset of laws of physics?
Yeah, I don't believe that there are laws of mentation that the mind is operating according to. I do think that there are physical laws that the underlying brain states which are identical to some of the mental states, right, are following. In terms of why can't you? Well, you can, right? You can do it. Why don't you do it? because if you do that, most people are going to be like, okay, weirdo, like, what are you doing? Like, it's just to do with what the accepted practice currently is, to do with rules of inference. I would recommend reading Lewis Carroll has a short paper called What Achilles Said to the Hare. And I think that that's an interesting illustration about how. Okay, so maybe I'll illustrate it quickly. So suppose that you see A hook B, which is like A then B, and then you see A. Well, then you infer from that B. Now, why is it that you infer B from that rather than having to see A hook B A and see A hook B A B, right, in order to then see the rule? And you get into this infinite regress of needing to apply rules. And the point is that the rule stops at a certain point, and the reason that it stops at that point, this is syntactically, is just because of convention, right? And so I think our laws of logic, and I think studying logic, right, it becomes okay. Some people still will say that in the meta logics you need to kind of assume the laws of classical logic or something, and you can argue for it that way. But I think that generally for most people studying the laws of logic, looking at proofs about completeness, for example, and things like that, will show just how much a product of human activity these kinds of languages are, and just how kind of confused we are when we ask all sorts of strange abstract questions about these practices.
All right, appreciate that. Hydronic Bear for $5 Canadian says, folded like a rusty car.
That's right. And if you pay that much money on my OnlyFans, you can watch me getting bent over and screwed.
Well, that's pretty gross. Tim Zimlick for $5 says, how and where do I find material Gnosis? I'd like to smash it with a hammer. Oh, no. That's kind of funny. You can find it down in the link below. We'll put his link.
No, he's asking where to find. Can he find knowledge that's material? Also, he's asking.
Oh, okay. He'd like
well,
to smash
I mean, you'd have to smash a brain in, yeah.
Okay, I thought he was saying like go to your YouTube channel and smash.
Well, I mean, I do actually have an open invitation for lots of the people who like to posture as masculine to come and spar with me at my gym MMA anytime. I'm honestly open to doing this. I will wear something. I do have a girlfriend, but I'll wear something super gay to emasculate them while I beat them up. So feel free.
For Nathan's new shirt fund, $2. I will get that $2 to Nathan if he needs it for the new shirt fund. Promise. Let's go through here. We still got a few more guys. Usually have a guy sending me all these, but Pete Moser for what is it? What is A? What is A for? Is that Australian? $5 Australian.
I think so, yeah.
Shirts off debate. Bold strategy, Cotton. That's
100% Cotton.
You haven't heard the bold strategy, Cotton? That's
no.
Oh man, maybe it's a generational thing. Well, Emmanuel for 100 Mexican pesos, which is exactly 32 American cents, says one great channel, 2 debaters, 1 moderator, 1 shirt, 1 rusted car, and 1 folded chair are 7 elements that convinced me to super chat. The amount was predetermined, though. We appreciate that from Well Emmanuel. Gentlemen, before you leave and we shut the show down, why don't you take us out? Oh, sorry, missed one here for $2. How can I read something if I don't exist?
Do I believe that you don't exist? I mean, again, I do believe you do exist, and I believe it's you that's reading things, so not a problem. I mean, if you didn't exist, then yeah, you couldn't read anything. That's true. But I do believe you do exist. So.
That's the movie it was from, the Cotton reference, Dodgeball. It's a good movie. I can't believe you haven't seen Dodgeball.
No, I have seen Dodgeball when he throws the wrench at the guy right in the face.
No. It's where it's the commentators. They're like watching it, and one of the commentators is a fucking idiot, like a straight out of Idiocracy idiot. And he's bold strategy, Cotton.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah. I think I do remember actually.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Risky Dave for $15 says another great debate. We appreciate that, Risky Dave. Everybody here at the Crucible appreciates everybody out there in Crucible land. Nathan, take a minute, shout your channel out to everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, my channel's Digital Gnosis, and I don't know. I've had so many crazy comments recently that I don't even know if I want to encourage all the rusty folded chair people to turn up and just comment rusty folded chair on all my videos.
Well, you'd actually
But,
be surprised. We have a pretty good progressive base that
Okay.
watches a lot of these. So if you don't want to shout it out, you don't have to.
No,
But
I mean, I
the
can
Crucible
shout it out.
community
I'm
is
just
not
saying.
known for harassment.
Well, yeah, I just say I don't know if I can deal with, so it'll hurt me so much, which is the goal of pre-sub. So I mean, maybe that's what they want, but yeah, it's Digital Gnosis is my channel.
Okay, gotcha. And then Jimbob, go ahead and shout your channel out too.
Just made by Jimbob on all the things, and if you don't see my name on that platform, I'm probably not on it.
All right, thanks so much, guys. Have a wonderful night. Hope you catch your train on time, and take care.
Thanks.